That was so funny.
I know, right?
Your face.
You were best.
You were best bear.
Hey, wait up! Stop, don't go!
You cannot escape this. What do you want from me? Your fear sustains me.
After that night, the river no longer slept the way it used to. Even when the wind was still, the water moved, circling itself as though troubled by unseen thoughts. Sephew felt it each time he stood at the bank. The calm that once welcomed him was gone, replaced by a quiet pressure in his chest, like a warning he could not fully understand. He tried to remind himself of how it all began. Before the mermaid, before Amara, there had only been the river and his solitude. His childhood had been shaped by loss. His parents had died during a season of sickness, leaving him to grow up faster than he should have. While others learned to laugh freely, Sephew learned how to survive. The river became his comfort then, a place where he could sit for hours and speak without being interrupted, even if no one answered back. So when the mermaid first appeared, it felt less like magic and more like destiny. She understood his silences. She never rushed him. She listened in a way that made him feel whole. In her world beneath the water, there was no gossip, no expectations, no reminders of what he lacked. Just stillness and devotion. He had promised her loyalty, spoken softly under the moon, believing his heart was settled. But humans change even when they swear they will not. Amara's arrival stirred something Sephew had buried deep. She reminded him of mornings filled with voices, of shared work and shared dreams. She asked him questions about his past, about what he wanted for the future. No one had asked him that in a long time. When she smiled at him, it was not mysterious or distant. It was warm, present, and real. As days passed, their paths crossed more often. They fetched water from the same well, walked the same dusty roads, shared meals during village gatherings. Sephew noticed how easily she fit into the rhythm of village life, how people were drawn to her kindness. Elders nodded in approval when she spoke. Children followed her, laughing. Each time Sephew laughed with her, guilt tightened around his heart. Each time he returned to the river, the mermaid's eyes searched his face. She asked fewer questions now, but her silence was heavier than words. The water around her darkened when she surfaced, and the moonlight no longer danced freely on the river's skin. The mermaid had her own story, one she had shared only in fragments. Long ago, she had fallen in love with a human who promised to stay. He never did. Since then, she had waited, watching generations pass, believing humans could not be trusted with promises. Sephew had been different. Or so she thought. She had chosen him because his loneliness felt honest, because his heart seemed steady. Now the river sensed her unrest. Fish vanished from familiar spots. Nets returned empty. Elders murmured about signs and balance being disturbed. They spoke of old folk tales where rivers took back what was disrespected. Mothers warned their children not to play near the water at dusk. Sephew felt trapped between fear and desire. He avoided the river some nights, pretending exhaustion, pretending he needed rest. Those nights, he lay awake listening to water crashing against rocks, louder than before. Other nights, he forced himself to go, kneeling by the bank and speaking words that felt thinner each time. The mermaid never accused him. That frightened him more than anger would have. She simply watched, her voice calm but her presence heavy. "The river hears what you do not say," she told him once. "Be careful what you hide." Meanwhile, Amara began to notice Sephew's distance. She saw the way his smile faded quickly, how his eyes drifted toward the river during conversations. She did not push him. Her own past had taught her that some wounds needed patience. Still, she felt a pull toward him she could not explain, as if their paths had been tied long before they met. One evening, as the sky burned red and gold, Amara followed Sephew at a distance. She did not mean to spy, only to understand. She watched him stop at the riverbank, stand silently, and speak to the water as though someone stood before him. The sight unsettled her. She felt a chill run through her body, the kind that comes when something familiar suddenly feels dangerous. From beneath the surface, the mermaid watched too. She saw the human woman standing in the shadows. She felt the shift in Sephew's heart before he spoke a single word. The river began to ripple outward, slow and deliberate, like a breath being drawn. 3 hearts were now tied to one river, each carrying hope, fear, and unspoken promises. And somewhere deep beneath the water, something ancient stirred, listening, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. The night Amara followed Sephu to the river stayed with her long after she returned to her hut. She could not explain what she had seen, only how it made her feel. The way Sephu stood so still, speaking softly to the water, was not the way a man spoke to himself. It felt personal, intimate, as if the river was listening and answering in ways her eyes could not see. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound outside made her think of moving water. From that day on, Amara watched more closely. She noticed how Sephu avoided her eyes whenever the river was mentioned. How he grew tense when elders spoke of strange signs, of fish disappearing and currents shifting. She wanted to ask him directly, but fear held her back. She was still new to the village, still finding her place. And yet, her heart was already entangled in something she did not understand. Sephu, on the other hand, felt as though the walls of his life were closing in. The balance he once believed he had maintained was slipping. In the daylight, he was pulled toward Amara, toward laughter and warmth and the simple comfort of human presence. At night, the river called to him with a force that felt older than choice. Each step toward one felt like betrayal of the other. The mermaid sensed everything. Beneath the surface, the river world reflected her unrest. Plants that once swayed gently now curled tightly around rocks. Creatures that lived deep in the water hid themselves away. She had given Sephu more than love. She had bound part of her spirit to his. That bond was not easily broken. It was not meant to be tested. She began to appear less often, choosing moments when the moon was hidden or the sky was heavy with clouds. When she did surface, her beauty remained, but there was a sharpness in her gaze. She asked Sephu about his days, about the people he spoke to. Her questions were calm, but the river around her moved in slow, restless circles. "The world above changes you," she said once, her voice barely rising above the water. "I can feel it." Sephu wanted to deny it. He wanted to say that nothing had changed, that his promises still mattered. But the words felt false before they even left his mouth. Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Meanwhile, the village elders gathered more often. They spoke in low voices about imbalance, about old African folktales where humans crossed lines meant to remain untouched. They warned that rivers were living things, bound by rules older than any village. When those rules were broken, consequences followed, not always immediately but always surely. One elder, nearly blind with age, spoke a name no one liked to hear. A name tied to a spirit of the deep, a guardian of waters and vows. Mothers clutched their children closer when she spoke. The river was listening, they believed. It always was. Amara felt the shift too. The river that once brought her peace now made her uneasy. She avoided it when she could, yet found herself drawn back again and again. Something about it felt personal, as though it knew her presence did not belong. Still, her feelings for Sephu only grew stronger. She saw his kindness, his struggle, the weight he carried alone. She believed, perhaps foolishly, that love could ease it. One afternoon she confronted him, gently. She asked why sadness followed him like a shadow. Sephu opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, dangerous and sharp. He chose instead to speak of loss, of fear of being alone. Amara listened, her eyes filled with compassion, unaware of how close she stood to a secret that could change everything. From the river, the mermaid watched the village more closely now. She saw Amara smile, her growing closeness to Sephu. Jealousy, an emotion she thought she had long buried, rose slowly within her. The river darkened with it. She did not hate the human woman, but she feared what her presence meant. Humans were unpredictable. Their hearts wandered. And when they left destruction behind. The river began to test Sephu. Paths flooded unexpectedly. Storms gathered without warning. Each sign felt like a question being asked again and again. Where did his loyalty truly lie? Each night he delayed returning to the water, the river grew louder, restless against its banks. 3 lives were now tangled in a web of love, secrecy, and ancient rules. No one spoke the full truth, yet everyone felt the weight of what was coming. The river waited, patient and watchful, knowing that soon choices would be made, and once they were, there would be no turning back. The signs became impossible to ignore. The river rose higher each night, creeping closer to the village paths, swallowing stones that had been dry for generations. Fishermen returned with empty hands and uneasy faces. Children were kept indoors at dusk, and even the bravest hunters avoided the water after sunset. The river was restless and everyone could feel it even if they did not know why. Sephu felt it most of all. His dreams were no longer his own. He saw water flooding his home, heard voices calling his name from beneath the surface, felt cold hands pulling at his ankles as he tried to walk away. He woke each morning drenched in sweat, his heart racing. The river was no longer just a place. It had become a presence, pressing into every part of his life. Amara noticed the change in him. The man who once laughed easily now carried fear in his eyes. He startled at sudden sounds. He stared at the river for long moments as though expecting it to speak aloud. One evening, unable to hold her worry any longer, she told him the village was afraid. She told him the elders believed something had been disturbed, something old. Sephew said nothing. He could not. To speak now would be to open a door he did not know how to close. That same night, the mermaid surfaced earlier than usual. The sky was heavy with clouds, the moon hidden. The water around her was dark, thick, and unnaturally still. When she spoke, her voice carried no softness. "You are running out of time," she said. Sephew felt his show of calm break. He asked her what she wanted from him, his voice shaking despite his effort to control it. The mermaid looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a depth that made his chest tighten. "I want what you promised," she replied. "And the river wants truth." The water began to move then, circling faster, brushing against the bank. Sephew felt fear grip him, not only of what the river could do, but of what he had already done. He had stood in two worlds too long, believing silence could protect him. Now it felt like silence had become the greatest betrayal of all. In the village, the elders made preparations. They gathered sacred items, whispered prayers passed down through generations. They spoke of appeasing the river, of restoring balance before it was too late. No one mentioned Sephew by name, but glances followed him wherever he went. The village had begun to sense where the trouble lay. Amara felt the shift in how people looked at him, and it frightened her. She pulled him aside one afternoon, her voice low and urgent. She asked him if he was in danger, if there was something he needed to tell her. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Sephew almost told her everything then. The words pressed against his lips, heavy with consequence. But before he could speak, a loud crack echoed from the riverbank. The ground trembled, just slightly, but enough to send birds scattering into the sky. Fear replaced conversation. The moment passed. That night, the storm came without warning. Rain poured down hard and fast, the river swelling rapidly. Water rushed against the banks with a force no one had seen before. Villagers ran to higher ground, shouting warnings to one another. Fires were extinguished, paths disappeared beneath the rising water. Amara stood at her doorway watching the chaos, her heart pounding. Through the rain, she saw Sephew moving toward the river, not away from it. She called out to him, but her voice was swallowed by thunder. Panic seized her, and she followed him, fear pushing her feet forward. At the river's edge, the water churned violently. The mermaid rose from the depths, her presence commanding and terrifying all at once. The river seemed to bend to her will, waves rising and falling with her breath. Sephew stood frozen, rain streaming down his face, torn between terror and longing. From behind him, unseen by either, Amara reached the edge of the clearing. She stopped short, her breath catching in her throat at the sight before her. The truth crashed into her all at once, heavy and unbelievable. The river roared louder, the storm pressing in from all sides. Three hearts stood on the edge of a moment that could not be undone. Promises, jealousy, fear, and ancient power collided in the darkness. And as the river swelled to its highest point, it became clear that whatever choice was made next would echo far beyond that night. They say the river remembers everything. Every promise whispered at dawn, every secret sunk beneath the moonlight. Long before this story was told around fires and village squares, before it became one of those African tales elders warned children about, the river watched a man make a choice that would change his life forever. And even now, if you listen closely when the water is calm, you might still hear his name drifting between the ripples. In a small village resting at the edge of a wide, slow-moving river, there lived a man named Sephew. He was known as a quiet hunter, strong in body but gentle in spirit. Sephew did not speak much, but when he did, people listened. He helped the weak, respected the elders, and never boasted of his skills. Yet for all his good qualities, there was one thing everyone noticed about him. He was alone. While others built homes filled with laughter and children, Sephew returned each evening to silence, carrying only his thoughts and the soft sounds of the river nearby. The villagers often wondered why he never chose a wife. Some said his heart had been broken long ago. Others believed he was waiting for a love that did not exist among humans. Sephew never corrected them. He simply smiled and walked down to the river whenever the loneliness grew too heavy. One night, as the moon painted silver paths across the water, Sephu noticed something strange. The river shimmered in a way he had never seen before. The air felt thick, almost alive. Then, from the depths, a figure rose slowly as if the water itself had shaped her. She was beautiful beyond words, with eyes that glowed like starlight reflected on water and hair that flowed like dark waves. She was a mermaid. Sephu should have run. Every folktale warned of spirits that lived beneath rivers, beings who offered love at a terrible price. But he did not move. The mermaid looked at him with sadness and curiosity, as though she had been watching him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was calm and gentle, not frightening at all. She said she had grown tired of the river's loneliness, just as he had grown tired of his own. Night after night, Sephu returned to the river. They talked about the world above and the world below, about dreams, pain, and the weight of being unseen. Slowly, a bond formed, quiet and deep. The mermaid offered him something no human woman ever had: unconditional devotion and a love untouched by judgment. In time, she became his wife, though their union was hidden from the village and blessed only by the river and the moon. At first, Sephu believed he had found peace. His home no longer felt empty. His steps were lighter, his smiles more frequent. The river became his refuge, his secret world. But secrets have a way of growing heavy, and the human heart is rarely satisfied for long. The villagers began to notice changes. Sephu no longer joined communal meals. He avoided celebrations and stayed close to the river even during important gatherings. Whispers followed him like shadows. Some claimed he was under a spell. Others feared he had angered the spirits. Still, no one dared confront him. Then one dry season morning, when the sun burned hotter than usual and the river pulled back from its banks, a woman walked into the village. Her name was Amara. She was human, warm and real, with laughter that carried easily and eyes filled with life. She had come from a distant land seeking a fresh start after losing everything she once loved. Amara met Sephu by chance. A simple greeting turned into conversation. Conversation turned into shared laughter. Unlike the mermaid, Amara walked beside him in daylight. She spoke to him in front of others. She reminded him of the world he once belonged to, a world of community, touch and open love. Sephu felt something stir inside him, something he thought the river had washed away. Guilt followed closely behind it. Each night, when he returned to the river, the mermaid watched him more closely. She noticed the change in his voice, the distance in his eyes. The river, once calm, began to ripple with unrest. Sephu now stood between two worlds. One offered mystery and devotion beneath the water. The other offered warmth and a future under the sun. And as the river darkened and Amara drew closer, one truth became clear: the river never forgets, and it never shares what it claims. What Sephu did next would not only break a heart, but awaken something ancient beneath the water, something that had been patient for far too long. And the river was already beginning to whisper. Amara stood frozen in the rain, her body refusing to move even as her mind raced. What she saw did not make sense, yet every part of her knew it was real. The woman rising from the river was not a trick of lightning or fear. She was real, powerful, and beautiful in a way that felt dangerous. The water responded to her like a living thing, bowing and surging as if it recognized its true owner. Sephu felt Amara's presence before he saw her. Something shifted behind him, a weight in the air. His heart sank. Slowly he turned and their eyes met. In that instant, everything he had hidden cracked open. The rain soaked them both, but neither noticed. Amara's expression was not anger, not yet. It was shock, deep and cutting. The mermaid followed his gaze and saw Amara clearly for the first time. Not as a shadow, not as a distant figure, but as a woman standing on the edge of the river, soaked and trembling, eyes wide with truth. A strange calm spread across the mermaid's face. The river stilled slightly as if listening. "So," the mermaid said softly, her voice carrying over the storm, "this is her." Amara took a step back, fear tightening her chest. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She realized then that the stories the elders told were not warnings from the past. They were messages meant for moments like this. Sephu tried to speak, but thunder cut through his words. The storm intensified, rain falling harder, faster. The river rose another step, water spilling onto the bank. The mermaid lifted her hand slightly, and the water obeyed, pulling back just enough to keep them all standing. "You brought her here," the mermaid said to Sephu, not accusing, simply stating a fact. "You let her see what was never meant for human eyes." Sephu shook his head, desperation breaking through. He said he never meant for this to happen, that he only wanted peace, that he was trying to protect everyone. The words sounded weak even to him. Amara finally found her voice. She asked who the woman was, though part of her already knew the answer. She asked why the river responded to her, why Sephu looked like a man standing at the edge of something far greater than himself. Before Sephu could answer, the mermaid spoke again. She said she was bound to the river, a guardian of its depth and its vows. She said love with humans always came at a cost. Her eyes never left Amara's face as she spoke, as though measuring her strength, her fear, her worth. Then came the twist no one expected. The mermaid revealed that the river was no longer satisfied with silence or delay. The bond between her and Sephu had reached a breaking point, and when such bonds broke, the river demanded balance. Not later. Not someday. No. A choice would have to be made before dawn, or the river would choose on its own. The ground shook beneath them, stronger this time. Far upstream, a loud crash echoed as part of the riverbank collapsed. In the distance, villagers shouted in panic. The storm was no longer just a storm. It was a warning. Amara felt fear unlike anything she had known, but beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve. She stepped forward, closer to Sephu, closer to the river. She said she did not understand the rules of spirits or rivers, but she understood love and truth. She said secrets were what had brought them here. The mermaid's eyes narrowed slightly. She told Amara that courage did not change ancient laws. The river did not care for intentions, only for actions and promises broken. She reminded Sephu of the words he had spoken under the moon, of the loyalty he had sworn. Sephu stood between them, his chest aching, his mind spinning. Every path forward felt like loss. Behind him, the village he had grown up in faced destruction. In front of him stood two lives, two worlds, both demanding something he could no longer give without consequence. As lightning split the sky, the river surged again, higher than before. The mermaid's voice dropped to a whisper only Sephu could hear. She told him the river had already begun to decide. The longer he waited, the fewer choices would remain. Amara watched his face, searching for hope, for clarity. The storm roared around them, the night closing in. And somewhere beneath the churning water, something ancient shifted, preparing for whatever came next. The storm reached its peak just before dawn. The river roared like a living beast, water spilling into the lower parts of the village as people scrambled to safety. Fires were long gone, swallowed by rain and fear. At the riverbank, time felt frozen, stretched thin between breaths. Sephu finally stepped forward. His voice was barely louder than the rain, but it carried weight. He spoke the truth at last. He confessed to Amara about the nights by the river, about the mermaid who had filled the emptiness he never healed, about the promise he made when he believed loneliness was his destiny. Each word cut through the storm like a blade, painful but necessary. Amara listened without interrupting. Tears mixed with rain on her face, but she did not turn away. When he finished, she said nothing at first. Then she spoke softly, saying love built on silence could never survive, whether it came from river or land. She told him she would not beg to be chosen. Whatever decision he made had to come from truth, not fear. The mermaid watched them both, her expression unreadable. The river slowed slightly as if waiting. She reminded Sephu that promises to the river were not like human words. They were bindings carved into spirit and water. To break them was to invite consequence. Yet she also admitted something she had never spoken aloud. She had known from the beginning that a human heart could never belong fully to the depths. Sephu fell to his knees at the edge of the river. He said he could not live in two worlds anymore. He chose the land, the village, the fragile, imperfect life of humans where love was risky but real. He accepted whatever punishment the river demanded, so long as Amara and the village were spared. For the first time, the mermaid's calm broke. Pain crossed her face, sharp and raw. The river surged violently, waves rising high, wind screaming through the trees. The elders watching from afar believed the end had come. Then the mermaid raised both hands and the river stilled. She said the river demanded balance, not destruction. A vow broken could be paid, but not without sacrifice. She released Sephu from the bond, but in doing so, she would lose the part of herself that had loved him. She would return to the depths as something less than she was before, a guardian without a heart for humans ever again. The water receded slowly as if exhaling. The storm weakened. Rain softened into a steady fall. Villagers stared in disbelief as the river pulled back from their homes, leaving mud and silence behind. Sephu cried out, begging her not to do it, saying he would rather be taken by the river than live with that knowledge. The mermaid smiled sadly and told him this was the price of loving across worlds. She sank beneath the surface, the water closing over her without a ripple. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the sun broke through the clouds, pale but real. The storm was over. The village survived, though changed. The elders declared the balance restored. Life slowly returned to normal, but the river was never approached the same way again. Sephu became quieter than before, carrying grief and relief side by side. Amara stayed, though the space between them took time to heal. Love did not return easily, but it returned honestly. Just when the story seemed complete, when peace felt earned, the final twist revealed itself. One morning, weeks later, Amara walked alone by the river at dawn. The water was calm, clearer than she had ever seen it. As she knelt to touch it, she noticed something glimmering beneath the surface. For a brief second, she saw a reflection that was not her own, eyes like starlight, watching, waiting. The river remained silent. But far beneath its calm surface, something ancient still remembered. After that morning by the river, Amara kept what she saw to herself. She did not tell Sephu about the eyes beneath the water, not because she feared him, but because she understood something then that words could not explain. Some things were not meant to be spoken aloud. Some truths lived better in silence, respected from a distance. Life in the village slowly found its rhythm again. The floods retreated, leaving behind broken paths and muddy fields, but also a sense of gratitude. People worked together to rebuild. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then stronger. Children played again, though never too close to the river, and elders watched the water with renewed respect. The river had reminded them all that it was not just a source of life, but a force with memory. Sephu threw himself into helping others. He repaired homes, cleared debris, and checked on the elderly each morning. His hands stayed busy, but his heart carried quiet weight. At night, he still dreamed of water sometimes, but the dreams were no longer pulling him under. Instead, they felt like farewells, echoes of something that had been real and was now gone. Amara remained by his side, though neither rushed what they were becoming. Love, they both learned, was not something to force after secrets and loss. It needed space to breathe. They spoke more honestly than before, even when the truth was uncomfortable. And slowly, trust grew again, not perfect but strong enough to hold. The elders performed one final ceremony at the riverbank, offering thanks rather than fear. They spoke words of respect to the water, acknowledging the balance that had been restored. From that day on, the river flowed calmly, its surface smooth, its presence steady. Fish returned. Crops grew. Life continued. Still, the river was never just scenery again. Sephu stopped visiting it alone at night. When he did go near it, it was in daylight, often with others nearby. He no longer whispered to the water. He listened instead. And in listening, he accepted that some loves were meant to teach, not to last. As seasons passed, Amara and Sephu built a life rooted in honesty. Their home filled with warmth, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been faced. They understood that love without truth could destroy villages, but love with truth, even when painful, could save them. Sometimes, when the moon was full and the village was quiet, Amara would stand at the river's edge and feel the cool air on her skin. She never saw the eyes again, but she felt watched over, not threatened. It was as if the river acknowledged her, not as a rival, but as a witness. And deep beneath the water, where no human eyes could reach, the river kept its memory. It remembered a mermaid who loved too deeply. A man who learned too late. A woman who arrived at the turning point of fate. It remembered the storm, the choice, and the balance restored. And it flowed on, carrying those memories forward, whispering them into new generations. That is why elders still tell this African folktale when the fire burns low. They tell it to remind listeners that promises matter, that silence can be dangerous, and that love must be chosen with courage and honesty. They tell it because the river is always listening. And it never forgets.